The dining room looked exactly the same as every Thanksgiving since I was 12. Same heavy oak chairs that creaked when you shifted. Same polished table that reflected the soft jazz humming from the corner speaker. Mom had prepared her signature roasted squash, and Dad carved the turkey with the surgical precision he'd perfected in the operating room. For just a moment, I almost convinced myself everything was normal, that I belonged here, that this was still my home. Then Dad looked up from passing the mashed potatoes, smiled that familiar smile, and asked the question that shattered everything, is the $2,000 enough each month? The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against my plate like a gunshot in the sudden silence. What money? I whispered. The pause that followed felt endless. Even the jazz seemed to fade into nothing. Dad's smile disappeared as he looked at Mom, who suddenly became very interested in her napkin. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely audible. I haven't gotten anything, Leona. Dad's voice was sharp, but not angry. Not yet. You told me you'd handle the transfers. I did, she said simply, dabbing her lips before setting down her napkin like it was made of glass. To who? His voice cracked on the words. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water. Syria's program is more expensive. She needs it more. You know how brutal the fashion industry is. It's competitive, unforgiving. And Iris is, she trailed off. Iris is what? Dad's voice was getting louder now. Just supposed to survive on scraps while our other daughter shops on Rodeo Drive. Byron, no, he cut her off. I need to know. For how long? Mom sighed like she was being asked to move mountains. Since August. Dad turned back to me, and I saw something break in his eyes. Iris, you've had nothing? No transfers, no support at all? I shook my head, feeling smaller than I had since childhood. I asked once, I said quietly. Mom said there wasn't anything left after tuition. Dad's shoulders fell like someone had cut his strings. I thought you were okay. I've been working nights, I said, the words tumbling out now. Tutoring, bar shifts, skipping meals. But sure, I'm fine. Mom's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. Don't do this here. It's Thanksgiving. But Dad didn't move. He just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. I need some air, I whispered, standing on unsteady legs. The hallway felt suffocating with memories. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, desperate to breathe. The fall semester had been a blur of desperation disguised as determination. I stacked my schedule until there wasn't a single blank moment. Anatomy lab at dawn, tutoring in the afternoons, bar shifts that stretched past midnight. I told myself it was temporary, just until I caught up, just until rent cleared, just until I could breathe again. Most days, I skipped breakfast. Lunch was whatever I could grab between buildings, usually a protein bar and black coffee that tasted like regret. Dinner was instant ramen or day-old pastries from the campus cafe that threw out unsold stock at closing. My shoes had started falling apart, the soles separated from the leather, flapping with each step like they were mocking me. I stapled them shut during a Friday night shift at the bar, hoping no one would notice. That same night, my body finally gave up pretending everything was fine. I remember the moment with crystal clarity. Tray of drinks in hand, music pulsing through my bones, someone waving frantically for service. Then heat, then nothing. When I opened my eyes, sterile white ceiling tiles stared back at me. Monitors beeped steadily nearby. An N4 snaked into my arm like a lifeline I didn't know I needed. The nurse asked if I had anyone to call. No, I lied. Later, my manager told me he'd called my parents after the ambulance came. No answer, he said, shrugging. Left messages. Figured they'd show up. They didn't. 2 days later, Callan appeared at my apartment uninvited. My lab partner had heard through the grapevine and showed up with a plastic bag of groceries and a pan of homemade baked ziti. I hadn't given him my address, but somehow he'd found me anyway. You look like you're disappearing, he said, setting the food on my counter with the gentleness of someone handling broken glass. I sat on the edge of my bed, legs folded, hoodie pulled tight around me like armor. "I'm fine," he didn't argue, just handed me a plate and sat across from me in comfortable silence. I took a bite. It was warm and real and tasted like someone cared. I had to stop myself from crying over a forkful of noodles. That night, I slept for 12 straight hours. The next morning, I found 2 messages from Mom on my phone. First, "Glad you're doing okay. Can you send Saria the name of that skincare brand you liked?" Second, "Don't forget to eat." I deleted both without responding. Later that week, I saw Saria's latest Instagram post. She was at some trendy brunch spot in West Hollywood, face lit by filtered sunlight, caption reading, "No better way to start the day. Thanks, Mom." #blessed brunch life. I stared at that photo for a long time before opening my banking app. My phone screen had a thin crack running across the corner, splitting faces and text just enough to distort everything. Still, I kept scrolling, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop myself. Saria had posted a carousel from a rooftop lounge. Velvet chairs, gold-rimmed cocktails, the kind of sunlight that made everything look expensive. She wore a cream silk dress tagged Dior, hair swept up in a style that probably cost more than my entire week's groceries. Mom always knows exactly what I need. #brunch life #gifted styled. I locked my phone, set it face down, and leaned back against my mattress. The ceiling above was flaking paint. The mini fridge hummed like a dying animal. I hadn't bought fresh vegetables in 3 weeks. A month ago, I'd emailed Mom asking if she could help cover a new anatomy atlas. Mine was falling apart, pages missing. Water stained from an overturned coffee cup during an all-night study session. She'd replied the next day, "That's a luxury, Iris. You'll have to make do." The same week, Saria posted about her new Balenciaga boots. "Thanks to my amazing mom for always supporting the dream." I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required energy I didn't have. I was just hollowed out, like whatever part of me had once believed in fairness had finally gone quiet. I wasn't asking to be spoiled. I just wanted to stop rationing Tylenol. I picked up my phone again. Saria's latest story was a short clip of her laughing, hair blowing as she leaned over a balcony with the city spread beneath her like a stage. Jazz played softly in the background. I watched it 3 times before muting the sound and opening my camera. The lighting in my room was terrible, but I took a picture anyway. Cracked nails, callous fingers, the same gray hoodie I'd worn for 4 days straight. No caption. I didn't post it. Instead, I scrolled to Saria's name in my contacts. I hadn't called her in months. Most of our exchanges were one-line texts, always initiated by me. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Before pressing call, she picked up on the second ring, voice light and breezy. "Iris, wow, you never call. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just wanted to check in. It's been a while." She laughed. "You miss me?" "Sure." My voice sounded thinner than I intended. She launched into a story about a recent fashion shoot in Pasadena, the stylist she didn't like, the almond milk shortage at her favorite cafe. I let her talk while counting the unopened bills on my desk. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask, "How do you manage it all financially?" "LA isn't cheap." "Oh," she said with a shrug I could hear through the phone. "Mom handles it. She wires me $3,500 every month, sometimes more if I have shoots or networking events." My mouth went dry. "That's great." "Yeah," she said, oblivious. "She just gets it, you know? She always says it's about investing in the dream." "Anyway, how are classes?" I barely heard the rest of our conversation. I nodded and said, "And that sounds cool in all the right places," but inside I was drowning. When we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the dark window. I looked pale, smaller, like something had been peeled away. I opened a new browser tab and searched for flights. The cheapest seat had 2 layovers and a 6-hour delay, but it would get me to Chicago in time for Thanksgiving dinner. I clicked book now, then closed my laptop and started packing. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say when I got there, but I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. And I knew that table would never feel the same again. 3 days later, we were back at that same kitchen table. Sunlight poured through the windows where I used to press my spelling tests for praise. The meal was quieter than usual, almost careful. Mom had made lentil soup and chicken salad, nothing extravagant, but more than I'd eaten in weeks. I forced down 2 bites before setting my fork aside. Dad glanced up. "You've lost weight," I shrugged. "I guess. You okay?" "Define okay," I said. He frowned. "What do you usually eat?" "Instant noodles, discounted sandwiches, leftovers from work if I'm lucky." Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "Is the 2,000 not covering enough?" I looked at him. He wasn't being sarcastic. He really didn't know. "There were no transfers, Dad." "Not one." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad turned to Mom, who kept her eyes fixed on her soup bowl like it held the secrets of the universe. "I've been sending it to Saria," she said finally, her voice eerily calm. "She needs it more." Dad's mouth opened, but no words came out. "She's in fashion, Byron," Mom continued. "It's expensive. She has events, people to meet. She has to maintain a certain image, and I don't need to eat?" I asked. Mom glanced at me like she was startled to hear my voice. "I'm not saying you don't need help," she said carefully. "I just thought you're stronger. You've always managed. Saria is more sensitive." Dad stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You told me you'd send it every month for Iris. You let me believe she was fine. She always is," Mom said, louder now. Dad looked at me again, and this time I saw something heavier than shock in his eyes. It looked like guilt. I pushed my chair back. "I came here for answers. I didn't expect them to be so simple," Mom called after me as I headed down the hallway, but I was already gone. Dad knocked on my bedroom door that night. I didn't answer, but he came in anyway, moving slowly like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "I keep going over everything." I sat up, waiting. "She told me she was sending it every month." "I thought you were okay. I thought you were comfortable." I didn't say anything. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking older than I remembered. "You know when Saria got her car?" I said maybe you could get one next year. "Your mother told me you didn't mind, that we could only afford one at the time." "I did mind," I said simply. He nodded slowly. "This summer, you wanted to do that medical camp. She said you changed your mind, said you wanted to stay home and save money." I cried for a week when she told me we couldn't afford it. My voice was steady, matter of fact. "Saria went to Italy that summer." Dad looked away. I should have asked more questions. "She made it easy not to." We sat in silence for a long time. "She always said you were independent," he continued. "That you didn't need as much, that you'd find a way." "She wasn't wrong," I said. "I did find a way. I just shouldn't have had to." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about strength, Iris. It's about fairness." And I missed it for too long. Downstairs, I could hear them arguing again. Mom's voice rose sharp, something about loyalty. Dad's response was lower, angrier, cutting through the walls like a knife. I closed my eyes. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The next morning, I found Dad in his study, glasses perched low on his nose, scrolling through bank statements. "Iris," he said when he noticed me, "I need you to know I didn't just believe your mother." He turned his laptop screen toward me. "Numbers, dates, transfers. I gave her access to the trust," he said. "The one set up for you and Saria, split evenly. I thought it was locked until you turned 25, but apparently she's been diverting funds to a separate account in Saria's name only." My throat felt tight. "How much?" 250,000. So far, I felt something shift inside me, not shock exactly, just confirmation. "What now?" "I've already called the attorney. We're starting the process to reverse the transactions." "It'll take time," I nodded. That was all I could do. That night, their voices rose again, sharper and messier than before. You didn't even ask me. Dad shouted that money was for both our daughters. She needs it more. Mom snapped back. I did what was best for her. Not for us, Dad said. Not for Iris. Hearing my name like that loud, defended, not dismissed sent something through me I didn't have words for. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. I trusted you, Dad said again, quieter now. And you stole from our own child. I turned away before I could hear her answer. I already knew what it would sound like. Saria called 2 days later, her voice tight and clipped at the edges. Mom told me I'm only getting 1,000 a month now. Is that true? Yeah, I said. Dad's handling the finances now, she exhaled sharply. I can't live on that. Rent, classes, materials, I know. There was silence, like she was waiting for me to offer a solution. I didn't. Do you really think this is fair? She asked. I think it's overdue. She hung up. That night, I caught Mom slipping money into an envelope. She didn't see me standing in the hallway, but I knew what it was for. Later, Dad did too. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood across from her in the kitchen and said, I can't do this anymore. She stared at him, unblinking. I was trying to protect her. He didn't flinch. And who was protecting Iris? Iris is fine, she said. She's always been fine. He looked tired. You keep saying that like it justifies everything. I just wanted the best for Saria. He shook his head. And what did Iris get? Mom didn't answer. The next morning, he called a lawyer. By the end of the week, he'd filed for legal separation. 1 year later, the house felt different, now quieter, like something had cracked and let in air that had never been allowed before. Mom moved through her days like she was underwater, cooking and cleaning and rearranging books that hadn't been touched in years. But she didn't talk to me. Not really. I stayed for 2 more nights, watching the silence stretch between rooms like something no one wanted to name. When I packed my bag and zipped the last pocket shut, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, looking like she couldn't decide whether to say something or not. She didn't. Back in Philadelphia, everything felt different. I dropped 2 of my bar shifts but kept the weekends. I kept tutoring because I liked the quiet clarity of explaining things to people who wanted to learn. The rest of the time, I studied, slept, and ate food that didn't come from a packet. My grades climbed fast not because I suddenly got smarter, but because I could finally breathe. I bought myself a pair of new sneakers. Not expensive, just intact. They felt like an upgrade I'd had to earn twice, once in work, once in worth. Saria started texting more often. At first it was out of habit, then it turned into something else. She sent pictures of outfits she'd styled for clients at the boutique where she now worked. They're not designer, but I like them more, she wrote once. They actually feel like mine. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, I'm glad. One night she called without warning, her voice quieter than usual. I think I finally see it now, she said. See what? What it cost you? All of it. There was a pause long enough to feel honest. I didn't want to believe it, she continued, because if I did, I'd have to admit Mom made things easier for me, and that meant she made things harder for you. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I don't need you to feel guilty, just don't pretend it was fair. I won't. That was all we said for a while. I heard the clink of glass on her end, probably tea, not wine. Saria never liked alcohol. She hated the taste. Are you going home for the holidays? She asked, not sure. Dad's going. I am too. She hesitated. Maybe we could go together. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Christmas morning. It's been a year since that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything. I'm still in Philadelphia, still in school, but everything feels steadier now. I sleep. I eat. I study without watching the clock like it's a threat. My professors have noticed the difference. So have I. Saria is still in LA, but she's not the same girl who used to post every brunch. She works part-time at a boutique that promotes sustainable fashion, designing pieces from leftover fabric. When she talks about her work now, the pride in her voice is quieter but real, Mom works at a home goods store. She says it's temporary, but I don't ask for details. Our calls are brief, polite. There's distance neither of us knows how to cross. Dad, on the other hand, calls every week. Sometimes we talk about school, sometimes we don't. When he visits, he brings books and groceries and listens like time is no longer a luxury he has to ration. One evening, Sarah called just as I was leaving the library, thinking about going home for the holidays. She said, "To see Mom." I didn't say anything. "Do you want to go together?" she asked. Not for her, just to do it right this time. There was a long silence, but it didn't feel heavy. She just waited. I found myself nodding before I even realized I was doing it. "Okay," I said. "Let's go." Christmas came with no grand gestures, just an early flight, 2 carry-ons, and a quiet knock at the door. Sarah and Dad went in first. I followed behind. Mom answered wearing a sweater I didn't recognize, plain, slightly worn. Her hair had more gray than last year. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach all the way. We sat around the same table where it all broke apart. The food was simple: roasted vegetables, store-bought pie, turkey that Dad had overcooked. No one brought up the past, but no one pretended it hadn't happened either. That, I think, was the win. We passed dishes. Sarah complimented the stuffing. Dad asked about my classes. Mom said she was still getting used to retail hours. It was honest. Not warm, but honest. Later that night, I unpacked in my childhood room. The walls looked smaller than I remembered. I pulled out a plain white envelope from my bag, my tuition receipt, paid in full. I placed it in the drawer next to a folded note Dad had written me a few months back. It read, "This is yours, not because you earned it, but because I finally saw you." I read it once more before closing the drawer. For a long time, I thought love had to be proven. That silence meant strength, and strength meant not needing anything. But I don't believe that anymore. I believe in being seen, and I believe some stories don't end with healing, they begin with it.